On today's episode,
In organized crime groups, that's their money comes from street level. Unfortunately, taking vulnerable youth, and now using them. Before, you'd see a lot of it was for drugs, trafficking, making money for that organization. Now we're seeing it for violence. People don't realize is why are youth targeted? Well, youth in BC, they fall under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. The penalties are lower. The likelihood of them going to jail is lower. And that's how these organizations are leveraging these young kids, saying, hey, it's okay, you're not going to get in trouble, right? You're just going to get sent home, right? And it's true, because when they see it happen, then they're like, oh, yeah, that's right, that's what happens. And now they take a bigger risk, right? And the problem is that once you start taking those bigger risks, now you're moving into that different, you're getting closer to the core.
welcome back to Well Informed, where we dive into the critical issues shaping public safety, crime prevention, and community engagement. Today, we're joined by someone who's been on the front lines of the fight against organized crime and gang violence, which is Sergeant Raj Jaswal. Raj, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Colin.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. It's been a long time coming. I know I've emailed you a couple times, and it's scheduling is always so tough. But no, it's really exciting to have you here because I think you bring a really unique perspective when it comes to gangs specifically. So, we had one of our other trainers on earlier, Chris Felton, who talks about his gang prevention work and what he does on the front lines, and obviously very different for organized crime when we look a little bit here. But so you've obviously been in law enforcement for over 15 years now. So can you tell us kind of what got you into that path?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me. I know it's been a long time coming, so it's exciting to be here. But yeah, I think everyone's journey is different. My journey wasn't to be in law enforcement. My journey was more into medical. Went to university. I studied physiology. But when I was working with people in law enforcement in rehabilitation, I saw that there was an eagerness to get back to work. And I was like, what is driving these people who want to go back to work? And that's where my passion for policing came in. And that's where I decided, what's so great? This profession, why do people want to be in it? So when I got into the profession, I realized it was about community. So my main drive is community. It may sound like a cliche, but it truly means a lot when I talk to community members and I meet with community members now that reinforce my belief of why I want to be a police officer. So community is my biggest driving force. And of course, everybody wants to fight crime. You watch movies growing up. You wanna be that person. You're playing, cops and robbers, whatever it might be.
Kick down the doors,
right? Yeah,
all that.
Batman, Robin, whatever you want to say. The cliches are. But the truth is, there's a bit of everybody who wants to do that. And I think that. But the truth of the matter is just being a part of the community and realizing that was the goal. The goal was to give back a bit and get in there and fight crime.
Yeah, absolutely. So, your work has spanned everything from high-level organized crime investigations to, again, the community-based things. So what were some of those things, or how did you find yourself specializing in those areas?
I think it was a bit of, when you get into policing, you do have this kind of really broad, that's the best part about big city policing and policing in municipalities is there's so many options. So other than being in frontline and taking a call day to day, no matter what the call may be, there's these subsets of specialties, right? There's these, you can be an investigator in many different units. For me, it came down to, I just had this strong affinity for, gang investigations, drug investigations, or organized crime. But I think another part of it goes back to me as community. Unfortunately, when I got on the job, I realized there was people that I grew up with that were involved in organized crime, that were involved in this gang lifestyle, a lifestyle that I didn't know anything about until I became on the job. And then I realized that these individuals are there. These are people that I went to school with, I played sports with, I grew up with, and you're like, they are definitely going a different way. So that was a drive for me to see how can I help in that aspect of community.
Yeah. So when people hear organized crime, they might think of what, like you mentioned, you see on the movies and the Hollywood versions of that. But what does it actually look like in British Columbia?
British Columbia is very unique. We're set in a setting of ports, different import-export area. And I think organized crime, I think people originally it was just thought of as gangs and drugs. Organized crime evolved from the fact that gangs started to collaborate. Gangs started to see a mutual interest. in making money, right? Commodity. And then here, we in BC are unique because we're very transnational. So organized crime in BC is a lucrative business of collaborators that want to make money, sell commodities that are worth, with, value that, most people don't comprehend. And it's just about making money and having that power. So organized crime thrives in BC because of those reasons of having that accessibility to those things, be it the southern border, be it the ports, be it their access across Canada. This is kind of one of those hub cities.
Yeah. One of the things I hear you speak on and know within British Columbia, how our gangs are a lot different than, again, when you look at what you see on the movies and Hollywood and TV, things like that, is specifically like areas and turf, because there is obviously an increase in things like access to weapons and firearms that, we're seeing. But then that organized crime, that gang violence is something that is starting to kind of leak a lot more into the public. So what are some of those things when we look at kind of territories and areas that are BC gangs essentially operate?
Yeah, it's very unique, right? You don't see graffiti on the walls. You don't see neighborhoods colliding. You don't see that. It's very it's territory, but it's very expanded, right? So the uniqueness to the groups here is that a lot of them don't need to be doing gangs. They don't need to be trafficking drugs. A lot of gang members or those involved in that lifestyle come from affluent families. They have homes. They have families that love them, support them. But there's just this niche or need that's been created. There's this I like to call it this need for glamorization. This need to want to be that individual from the movies, that person there. You want to have that power and control. And that's what's driving our current generation, is having power, having control, bravado, like, hey, I'm okay, nothing's going to happen to me. Because guess what? They actually have the support at home.
Yeah.
And where you look at those other, gangs, typical traditional gangs that don't have maybe that support at home, that's going to get them out of that trouble. So very unique to BC, and BC is because they have that. I think that glamorization is the key to what they want.
Yeah, and I think when it's compared to, again, what we see outside or in those normal traditional gangs, you see, look at the motivation. A lot of the times it is money. It is making money, but that is what it seems here, just kind of a side version of it, but it is more that power, that glamorization of that. So what do you think are some of the factors that go into that glamorization of that life?
I think social media is the biggest one. I think we're seeing this, instant gratification, money at the fingertips, being able to purchase what you want, right? If, whatever the t-shirt costs $1,000, shoes cost this, just having that. And I think the other thing is some people have got this, some of these organized groups have created their own family, right? And then once they trap someone in, they can leverage that. And it is that ability to communicate through social media, reach an audience far beyond what you would think, right? You don't go around these days and see traditional gang graffiti. You do see graffiti, but you don't see it like you used to see it. You don't see a territorial marking. You see graffiti artists, but you don't see like you would see and I'll use this in the U.S. You would see Bloods, Crips, blue, red. Here you're not seeing that. You're seeing it hidden, and I think that our gangs and our groups are relying on the social media glamorization so that they can actually get that gratification that, hey, look who we are. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing for them, is to have, because with that comes power, and it seems like everybody's trying to hold on to some power.
Right. Interesting. So what do you think are some of the biggest, misconceptions that the public has about that culture in recruitment?
I think one of the biggest misconceptions is people don't associate the mental health crisis to some of these individuals that are being involved in organized crime. People I tell you that some people don't need to be in this, right? They have loving families, they come from affluent families, they don't need to, they can have that. But some people aren't realizing that there is a component of the mental health, the antisocial behavior, the anxiety disorders, things that go undiagnosed, specifically in different communities. And I think that really perpetuates how our gangs are formed, because typically it's the recruitment that affects our gangs, right? And they're recruiting individuals that are making poor choices because they're being leveraged or they're being taken advantage of. And sometimes that has to do with just their mental health and their ability to want to be welcomed, want to be like respected, want to be loved. Really, the truth is they just want to belong. Yeah. And if the best way to belong is in the group that has the most power, that has the most social media credibility, and then you kind of fit in.
Right. So those are some of the promises that they think they're getting. Yeah. But in turn, that's not always the reality, right?
Yeah, and they're lacking something, and they're being exploited. And so there's clearly how you're seeing the gangs start to form and expand.
Mm-hmm. So there's obviously a lot of focus on what we see for suppression and enforcement in this world. But as we know, prevention is just as critical. So what actually works when it comes to young people or preventing them from getting into some of those youth gangs or negative peer groups?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think that it's a very complex answer.
Yeah.
And I think that it starts with, and I'll say this, and it really starts at home, and at home it starts with education. I think that for many families, they're working very hard. Parents, everyone's working hard, so there is this lack of supervision at times. And I think it comes down to the isolation of the individual. But I think the problem is that the community and the parents sometimes aren't educated on what to look for. And so I think that for prevention, it has to start early. For teachers, educators, law enforcement, first responders, a lot of the time you're dealing with an incident, right? Mm-hmm. And if we talk about that pathway to from violence to gang behavior, what point is it going to be the critical part for education? So I think education is important, and really opening the eyes to the caregivers that are going to see them the most to see those signs. Right, and those signs of recruitment and pathways into gang-associated behavior are very critical, because if you can navigate them early and kind of get in front of them, you might have the opportunity to stop what eventually comes to a situation where it gets to the point where it's an intervention by law enforcement, which is very different.
Right. So you talked a little bit about some of those warning signs, things to look out for. What are some of those things, whether it's a parent, caregiver, a teacher, somebody who is starting to go down that pathway?
Yeah, I think that you have to look at signs in different way these days, unfortunately, with the way the world works, technology. So I think if you're looking for physical signs, you're going to look at are the kids getting money that they shouldn't have, right? So are they buying clothing? Are they spending money that you're like, we as parents haven't given them this money? How are they doing this? How are they going on trips? How are they buying these expensive clothing items? Keeping an eye on what they are, just because, and one of the things stories I go back to is, parents think that, their kids have these really expensive bags and they get told they're just knockoffs. Mm-hmm. But it's really about getting into finding out. So those are the materialistic things that you can see, like cars, shoes, clothing, cell phones, the physical things. But there's also this big hidden thing. And the hidden thing is what is going on in social media? What is going on in the background that they can't see, right? And that could be just which groups they're aligned with, what the music they're listening to, the types of people they're interacting with. Those are key things. And then there's small things. You start to look at substance use, right? You can start looking at factors of, is there this vaping, and there's so many factors like use of tobacco, nicotine, small drugs. Those are things that you can look at as other factors that sometimes are hidden from the families, and are more from behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times as well, parents, caregivers may actually be aware of some of those things that you've described, but there could be a potential, roadblock that's getting in the way of them potentially seeking some of that help. So when it comes to things like resources or some just potential concrete steps, if they do notice those things, especially parents and caregivers in the home, like what sort of resources are actually out there?
There's quite a few. I mean, I first off, I'll just say any parent who is concerned or any community member, law enforcement has tools, has access, can get that help. It may not be through them, it may be through a partner or a program. But I think there's what I do appreciate is the amount of community effort and the amount of effort from schools and other organizations, organizations like even like SST, like having the ability to just scan a QR code, get help, ask for help. So community-based, you're seeing a lot of associations that are providing education and training. So it's help out there. We're seeing more and more programs going into this prevention model, and so I think some of them would be like, from a law enforcement perspective, there's ability to connect with some of these programs, mentorship programs. We're seeing a lot of athletic programs being developed. So there are those tools there, but if it's somebody who just wants to know, like, I see these signs, I see what's happening, I don't know what it is, the best resources are your school resource officers, if you have them, because they're right there. And then from there, if it's to be involved in gang and drug activity, going to the law enforcement and saying, we're not sure, these are the signs, this is what we're seeing. So there are those types of resources early on to get some answers.
Yeah, I think that's huge because, again, for parents, caregivers, anybody who may be listening and are unsure of some of those resources that they're out there, I can imagine their mind is simply just, I can talk to the school, or, when they say talk to a school resource officer or police, that their mind, they're just dialing, non-emergency or 911 and starting that conversation. But, to your point, that community aspect, there's so many different available ways for them to reach out without going directly to that enforcement side.
Yeah. And I will also add this, and I'm very passionate about this part of it is, I just want parents, community members to know that if you feel like you have something or your gut's telling you, go with your gut. Don't be persuaded that it's not what you think it is. It's okay to be wrong, that it's okay to be overcautious and wrong, but it's not going to help if you hold on to something and you try it and it comes out later on. And what I mean by that is sometimes communities feel ashamed. Families feel ashamed of coming forward because they don't want people to know that their son, daughter is involved in something. They don't want to, and they don't want to admit it.
Right.
But and I've talked to many families who, after the fact, say, we should have come forward sooner. There were resources there, but they either got bad advice, they got bad guidance, or they just felt ashamed. And I want to tell those families that it's okay to be wrong.
Yeah.
Kids will forgive you. Right? But if you're right, then you need to get that intervention early instead of waiting.
Yeah, because that is sort of a pathway, right? That gang involvement is that pathway. And one of the things that I know you talk about in your sessions, because you train all throughout North America, is kind of that, that structure, that hierarchy in terms of who's on the outside or who's are the more core committed groups. Do you kind of want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, our youth, our kids, they all go to school. They all start school. It's a blank slate. Everybody's in what we call that general population, and it's certain factors that drive people in, right? And I know from SST standpoint, it's those domains, right? And if you look at the different domains, be it a family domain, a school domain, those factors are what drive people from just going to school to inside this hierarchy. And you can call it like, you can use a sports analogy, like you could be in the NHL or you could be in the AHL, you could be in the juniors, is that eventually what an organized crime group wants or a negative gang group wants is they want to bring as many people into that core because they're committed to the motivations of that group. So most individuals are going to stay in the outside periphery of general population. There'll be some that get driven in. Those are the ones that we want prevention. We want to do prevention before they get committed.
Yeah.
Once they're committed, it's very hard to pull them out. And I feel like a lot of the times the signs are there, but because of community, family, just dynamics, maybe in some communities, I can say lack of resources. There can be some areas that don't fit resourcing that's needed. We're talking about immigration, right? A lot of families that don't have language barriers, other barriers. You can see people go from the general population to committed very fast. And it's that keeping them in the general population is our goal. prevention is the best if we hit it early and keep them out of that kind of core area.
Yeah, and as they go down that, they'll start to show some of those warning signs that you mentioned before, right? And what we notice on that social media side is they'll start to identify it with a certain group first. They'll use some sort of symbol like digital gang graffiti, right? Those are the things where, it's the music groups and what they're sharing, but it's also some of those self-identifiers as well.
Yeah.
Like the handles on social media will have certain letters or phrases or things like that.
Yeah, and it just also comes down to their behavior, right? You'll see a shift in behavior. You'll see a shift in what they're buying, what they want to wear, how they talk. That's a big one. How they talk, because they're trying to emulate that lingo. Tardiness to school. Maybe changing their job, providing you information that they're working, but it's really important to follow up what that job is, right? We know that drug trafficking at that high school level, those are the kids that are driving around doing that. So if they're saying they're working after school hours, we need to follow up with that. The other one is important is to that tardiness, watching over those absentees from school. What is going on here, right? But you will see a shift in behavior because, going from the general population to that core, you're going to see changes in that mental health too. You're going to see changes in those behaviors of anxiety, antisocial kind of behavior. You're going to see different types of levels that you might not see from those kids or your kids before that.
Yeah, because I'm sure once they get more committed to that group, they're probably going to see some things that maybe they're not prepared for. Right, so you kind of mentioned a little bit earlier that idea of they're working late, they're delivering drugs, and we kind of refer that to as like that dial-a-dope operation. So for those who maybe haven't heard or unaware, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, so I mean, a dial-a-dope or drug trafficking operation is typically a street-level operation, right? It's to get drugs into the community to people that are vulnerable or those that are using drugs. And so how it is it's kind of like a system, right? It's a system where, in most cases, these criminal organizations recruit kids, young adults, and they do all of the risk. They take all the risks. They have a car, they have some sort of transportation, and they usually work, anywhere from 10 to 12-hour shifts. It could be 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., for example, or 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And you're just going around selling drugs, right? And now you're tired for school. You get off and you're saying you're working late, and that's that pattern, right? And so many things that you just mentioned will be seen and heard that will be take a big impact on these students and young kids.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, you're up working 12 hours at night and you have to go to school after, probably gonna be falling asleep on the desk for a little bit.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think I'd be able to.
Yeah, no, it's tough, right? And then it's money too, right? Like you're gonna get paid a couple $100 for your time, and for some kids that's a lot, right? $200, and you may not get caught in the first. You may not even. No one's gonna know who you are in the first little bit, but eventually you'll get caught because you'll get stopped by law enforcement. You'll get identified, and you'll start to get caught. And the biggest thing is you'll then start to lose drugs because they'll get seized. You take so many risks by doing that. Rival organizations, groups that are going to come, violence will start, and then weapons get involved, and so you start to see these things. And now if you're just and a lot of the times, to be honest, these kids don't even know who they're working for.
Yeah,
they don't know which gang they're working for. They don't know what organization they're working for. They just think they're making money by selling some drugs.
It's just a friend who's saying, hey, can you do this one night and get hooked on it, basically. And
organized crime groups, that's their money comes from street level. Unfortunately, taking vulnerable youth, and now using them. Before, you'd see a lot of it was for drugs trafficking, making money for that organization. Now we're seeing it for violence because they're going across, and I think people don't realize is why are youth targeted? Well, youth in BC, they fall under the Youth Criminal Justice Act. The penalties are lower. The likelihood of them going to jail is lower. First-time offenders will likely, or the first-time kids, they'll get a slap on the wrist. Maybe they'll get caught and be brought home. And that's how these organizations are leveraging these young kids, saying, hey, it's okay, you're not going to get in trouble, right? You're just going to get sent home, right? And it's true, because when they see it happen, then they're like, oh yeah, that's right, that's what happens. And now they take a bigger risk, right? And the problem is that once you start taking those bigger risks, Now you're moving into that different, you're getting closer to the core.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of the times, which I don't think people realize, is sometimes their own organization, their own friend who says, hey, I just need you to do this, actually orchestrates that they take that stuff from them without them knowing. And now guess what? You owe this friend of yours maybe $1,000 of worth of drugs or something that you lose.
What's the reason behind that?
Well, I think it's to get them into the committed, right? Because I guess you gotta look at it this way. If you're one of these youth, do you really want to go home and say, hey, I kind of messed up, but I owe somebody money? But you're going to have to explain why. Maybe it's not a big amount of money, so you can get away with it. But a lot of the times, a parent should be asking, well, how are you owing somebody $1,000? $500, because nobody wants to go home and tell their parents, hey, you know what, I was selling some drugs, I lost the drugs. But what they may not realize is they might have been lost because their own group took it because they're trying to get them to be into the core, right? We owe you, you owe us.
So that's there's that threat there. It's like, if you don't pay us, we know this about you, we know that about you, and that's the hook to get them committed to there.
And that's where I bring in that mental health piece, because if you're that kid who's just thinking, I'm just selling marijuana, and all of a sudden you lose a bunch of drugs, and now the group says, you owe us $5,000. They know they can't go to mom and dad to get $5,000. They can't go to a teacher. Either they have to be, quote unquote, a rat, which nobody wants to do. Maybe they're going to get threatened to get beat up. We see all that, but that really affects their mental health, right?
Yeah.
You're going to see a change in behavior, and we forget that change in behavior. We start to maybe allude to that as being part of something else, but sometimes it's because they don't know what to do, right?
Yeah.
They've gotten themselves in a predicament, and now they're looking over their shoulders. They're going to get beat up. They're going to get bear maced, or they're going to get hit with a baton, or they're just going to get jumped, right?
Yeah.
And those are the things that changes their behavior.
Absolutely. So we've looked at the prevention side of things, of course, for community and talking with police officers and other community members, but of course for the actual youth who are potentially seeing this and really are seeing this at the speed of social media at all the times and are looking to potentially exactly follow those steps, right? What kind of sources or community programs or teachings do we have for some of those kids who may be in that exact spot?
Yeah, I think that there's a ton of opportunity where we have these student sessions. I think there's a lot of education campaigns going on too, be it from from the provincial side, from the school side, from a private industry side. There's a lot of people invested in our kids and youth, and there is tools and resources. We talk about social media. Yes, they're seeing all this stuff, but they also have access on their fingertips to some of those resources. Be it one of the ones that I always talk to people about is the Erase, right? Is having the ability to report. Crime Stoppers. Kids know what Crime Stoppers are. They have the ability to report on Crime Stoppers. At the end of the day, most of the schools and a lot of the teachers and counselors that I've talked to, they have systems in process at school for making it even an anonymous report. And that's great, because sometimes they're making the report on themselves because they want to get the intervention, right? So they're like, if they know they have to do something that they don't want to do, it's better to report on yourself, and hopefully whoever reads it on the other end goes and does an intervention and saves them from doing something they don't want to do.
And recognizes that is a cry for help.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the next part, is that cry for help can be very complex. It may not just be because they lost some drugs. There's other factors in play. So there's definitely, I think there's definitely fingertips, going back to kind of what you're asking. At fingertips, there's resources, and I think kids know about them. And at the end of the day, I think there's also an environment that's been created for kids to go to teachers, to go to counselors, to go to even parents that are of their friends. There's safe places for kids to go to. I just think that they get persuaded. And then I go back to the education at home. If at home there's a safe space for those conversations, I think you see a lot more of that ability for students to go and have that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Just going back actually to the enforcement side of things, obviously being frontline law enforcement for a number of years and you being the ones to pull over some of those youth there, one of the things that I've learned from you in the past little bit is how things can be hidden in vehicles. And that was something that you specialized in, and I learned a lot. So I'm just curious, without obviously giving away too much details, there is actually a lot of complexity that some of these organized crimes will go to actually conceal things within vehicles. And again, for me, that was only what I saw on the movies. I was like, come on, really?
Yeah, you know what? Organized crime is very sophisticated. Like I said, it's a transnational business. And the reason why it is organized crime is because they take the time to organize. The transnational part is the ability to move commodities, right? We see now, like, you know, certain territories, certain regions offer something, but what you might need from a different one. So let's talk about, you know, guns technically aren't produced mostly in Canada. They're produced in other countries. So you need that commodity. But guess what? We produce a lot of marijuana, so we wanna push that out. So that trading makes us transnational. So the next step of that is, you know, transportation. So you need to move these things. And I don't think anybody who's listening to this podcast or anybody who's in this world can easily at their fingertips see the mechanisms through simple searches that organized crime groups are sophisticated, and they need to move product, they need to move their contraband, and the car is the best way. So there's many times that no matter what the transportation method is they can develop and they can create voids in their cars. They can create special concealment compartments. You know, here in BC, we're very fortunate. We have the BC Armored Vehicle and Compartment Control Act, which doesn't allow anyone to have those types of tools. And really, it's a tool. It's a tool for organized crime to move things concealed, right? But this is a trend that's across the country, across North America. It's across the world, right? Creating these types of things, and it is like the movies, right? Yeah. I mean, you can go on Amazon and you can type in concealment, and you can get anything you want. You can look for it. We talk about it in our digital threat assessment. You can get a USB that's disguised, right? Right. All these are concealment ways to conceal it. Maybe it's data in cars. It could be physical products. So we are seeing those trends, definitely.
Yeah, it's really interesting where there is like a combination of buttons that you press. The key's got to be in a certain position, and it truly is like, because I've seen, again, some just images, like, oh my gosh, like that is sophisticated.
Yeah, and it's also that lure, right? You're bringing that glamorization to the lifestyle, because, you know, if you're a youth and you're wanting to get into this, I think they would prefer to be in a car that has something that's sophisticated like that, because it's cool, it's glamorized, versus just, you know, having nothing, right? Yeah. So it just adds to that.
Of course. So you obviously do a lot of training for across North America for, you know, tackling organized crime. I know we've talked so much about some specific lessons here, but what are some practical steps that law enforcement across the country, across North America, what are some practical steps that they can do to strengthen relationships in their community?
Oh, that's a good one. I think that being involved in the community is going to be the first part, right? And I think I'd say that majority of law enforcement across the country agencies have programs that are integrated within the community, right? Be it an SRO program, be it a community diversity program, some type of outreach program is available. Most departments have a community matters type of approach, right? Where they deal with community concerns, and the community can have the ability. So the biggest thing is information and awareness. Right. So but it has to go both ways, right? You can give information to the community for their awareness, but you can also receive information from the community for your own awareness. Yeah. The difference is, you know, we typically give information to communities to make them aware and educate them so that they can call us. We encourage communities to call us. The other way is when we get information for our awareness, we have the tools to look at doing something with that intervention, right? Be it enforcement, be it suppression, be it having a prevention model, because we have that ability. So I think the key thing is that communities and law enforcement just need to keep open dialogue, and both have to receive information and awareness and then know what to do with it.
Yeah, awesome. You've been also heavily involved in kind of equity, diversity, and inclusion in policing within law enforcement. So why do you think that work is so important, especially in today's climate?
Well, it kind of goes back to your last question, community. Yeah. Communities are growing. You know, Canada is very diverse, multicultural. And I think that with all of these different communities that are growing, that are being welcomed into Canada, with each community becomes their own struggles, their own barriers, right? So you got to look at what are some of the key barriers. Language is a big barrier, right? Economy, economics of some of these families is a big barrier. For a lot of them, they don't even understand. Like, could you imagine, like, you come from a country where policing may not be as systematic as it is here. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a lot more bias and institutional racism and stuff happening in where they came from. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's just no trust in law enforcement from where they came from. And now they come here and they're not getting any of that information and awareness to say, hey, this is a different type of law enforcement here, right? So we see those barriers, their inability to connect, right? So the importance of that is that if you truly want to make an impact in the community, you have to know the makeup of your community. Yeah. And you need to understand that some of them just have experiences that are different from the ones that we may have had, yeah, right?
Absolutely. Awesome. And for those who may be, again, listening, or when it comes to the prevention side, I mean, we've talked about so many of the amazing crucial steps and some of the resources that are out there. I think about, your career and what has gone on throughout those number of years. And when we know from training, the most impact we can have, comes from those who have those lived experiences. So, for you, what is kind of a really, a potentially impactful moment that you've seen in your career that really has that good news?
Well, that's a tough question. I think the impactful moments come from when you see people that for me that I may have intervened, suppressed, done, enforcement, or come across, and you see them successfully graduate, or you run into somebody that you've done training with, or you've helped, parents, families who thank you, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and say, whatever happened X amount of years ago, I just want to say thank you. It changed something, right? And I think those are the most gratifying, those are the most impactful things you can do. And I've been very fortunate to do this across North America. And so hearing the impact of those stories, at the end of the day, I always say to people, like, if it's just one person, right? It's that cliche. If it's just one person that you can help, mm-hmm. We need to be proud of that. But I think the impact is truly felt when you see that feedback. When you hear from people year after, 2 years later, or you hear from people who want to see, hey, are you speaking at this? Or what you said worked, and they give you an example, yeah. Right? I kind of want to go back to that other question that you just mm-hmm. gave me. I have a friend who told me this. I'm talking about the kind of the immigration and understanding community. I just want to put this on there, is that this was really impactful for me, is understanding why that community is important. I have a friend that works with kids as well, mm-hmm. and he told me a story about he had a new immigrant family come in, and they were doing drills, and it was a simple drill, and it was a fire alarm drill, and the fire alarm got pulled, and everybody knows where to go, but this individual kid went under the table, and my friend wanted to find out, well, what happened? Because this individual came from a country where an alarm goes off, there's bombs are going off. This individual's cultural background made him officially go into defensive mode under the table, wow. Right? And that was such a telling story to me that I realized that's why community matters. That's why we have to understand some of the barriers that people face. So that's impactful for me. Yeah. So when I do my work, I look back at the other way. So I 100% will say that it's a gratification comes from talking to people who have shared their stories and their examples because of something I might have shared. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So, I mean, you've given so many amazing kind of nuggets, tidbits of information for individuals, families who may be seeing some of these things. If there's one kind of final thought you would want to leave with them to hold on to, what would that be?
Our youth matter, right? Our youth matter. Our youth are important. They're our future. I think the biggest thought that I would want to leave with somebody who's watching this, listening to this, is if they think they see the signs on the pathways to gang violence, or they're seeing signs of negative peer groups, maybe some mental health deterioration, please don't push it aside. if you're wrong, it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
You'll learn from it. You will move on from it. But if you're right, you're going to get the help. You're going to find those tools. So just never give up, and trust your gut. So if you're seeing the things that don't just be willfully blind to it. Come forward, ask for help, and you'll be, and there'll be somebody there. There'll be something there. There'll be a program there. There's many resources available.
And those resources we're going to put in the link dump for everybody to be able who watches and sees this to be able to click on and use. So whether even you are BC, whether you're not BC, there's still some really great resources, even though they may be BC specific, that anybody could latch onto and hold on to. So.
Yeah, and I just want to end with saying kind of like, no community is immune from anything, right? No community is immune from violence, gang violence. There's no more borders that say, okay, well, I live in this community, so this can't happen here. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter where you live. Every community, there's a potential. So just as long as to remember, again, no community is immune from gang violence, those pathways, and therefore having those resources, right? No matter what province you're in, what country you're in, is going to be beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, Raj, absolute pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for sharing. And what's next in the career step for this?
You know what? I think first, thank you for having me. But I think continuing this kind of journey on education prevention, I think is the most rewarding for me. I love hearing how other people are dealing with things and how we can help them. Mm-hmm. So just continuing the fight forward on education and training.
Love it. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, appreciate it.